Hello, year eight. It is Miss Bishop here, not Mr. Windsor, who you were probably expecting. Sorry, you've got me until the end of term now. We are starting a new unit, civil rights. So we are going to start today just by having a little background about the abolition of slavery and the Jim Crow laws. Now, this unit is going to relate quite heavily to what is going on in the news right now with regards to the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm so sorry. There is somebody either revving a motorbike engine or a chainsaw. Hopefully they'll stop. So it will be covering things as well that are happening in the news currently. But these lessons that we're focusing on at the moment will be purely historical. So looking at what happened in the 1800s with the 13th Amendment and then moving into the 1960s with these Jim Crow laws. Okay. So lots of questions around this. Please do, if you have any questions, certainly email me. I've put my email address at the end of the lesson and we can go through them. What I want you to do to start off with is to have a look at these photographs. What are they showing and how do they make you feel? I'm going to give you a second to pause the screen and then I will go through and tell you how I feel. Okay, and what I think is going on might not necessarily be how you feel, or you might agree with me. So pause the screen, have a look, and then we will come back and have a look through these. Right, so what we've got here is a wash basin. So clearly it's either a wash basin, no, it's a water fountain. I beg your pardon, it is a water fountain. So what you can see here is that they have been separated. So this large one is a white one for white people, and this one here says coloured. So this would have been used for Black people, for Asians, for Native Americans. Anybody who wasn't white would have used that water fountain. You can see here that we have got a coloured waiting room. Okay, so it at a train station or waiting for a bus, people would have been segregated. So white people would have been separated from Black people and from Asians and from other nationalities. Okay. Also, we've got here Lincoln Beach, which was for coloured people. So even on the beach, people would have been separated. Now, how does this make me feel? It makes me feel very uncomfortable because if you think about how things are now, everybody mixes together. This is in America, remember. This isn't going to be in the UK. So up until last century, this was a thing. It does make you feel a bit uncomfortable that actually, if you'd have lived 50 years ago, 60 years ago, this is how life would have been like. Everything was separate. We're going to have a look at it in more detail. So it makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. It makes you feel like a bit disgusted, really, that people could have got away with doing this. I think that's the crux of the matter is how did they get away with keeping people separate? What did they think would happen when people mixed? So we're going to have a little bit look more in depth at that. So today we're going to understand the meaning of segregation, explain the purpose of the Jim Crow laws, and evaluate the significance of the Jim Crow laws to those people who lived in America after the Civil War. So, what happened after the abolition of slavery? So the abolition of slavery means the abolishing slavery, so getting rid of it, so making it illegal. Okay, in the north of America, there was a divide between the north and the south of America. In the north, they abolished slavery in 1804. However, it was after the Civil War in 1865 that it happened everywhere with the 13th Amendment. Okay, America is built on amendments. They have their rights. Just as we have our laws, this is American laws. So the 13th Amendment, the US Constitution, which was ratified, so put into play in 1865 in the aftermath of the Civil War, states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Right. That's got a lot of long words in it. So let's break that down. So neither slavery, okay, nor involuntary servitude. So involuntary servitude basically means you are serving someone and don't have the right to say no. So you are involuntarily doing something, okay, so against your will, except as a punishment for crime. So you could still be a slave, say if you had been convicted of a crime, say murder, it could be given out as a form of punishment. Okay. And it says here, any place subject to their jurisdiction. That would be any country that is run by the United States. Okay, so places like the islands you've got in the Pacific as well. So any islands that would come under American laws, places like Guam, the US Virgin Islands, places like that. Okay, American Samoa, anywhere like that. Okay. So what I want us to do is, you have been given a booklet which has been set on class charts. I want us to go through that now, just read a little bit of background information, and then we can move on to the next task. So what we've got here are the Jim Crow laws as a background. Okay. So the Jim Crow laws were named as such. There is a lot of talk about how this came about, but it's supposedly a mixture of words. It's a play on words. It's supposedly a dance. Basically, it's a derogatory term. Okay. Something that was used in a bad way. Okay. And these laws came about even though after the Civil War, they made slavery illegal. People were like, okay, but we still need to have some segregation, some separation between white people and coloured people in America. So that's where these laws came in. These laws are the laws that the coloured people, so the people that have come over from Africa as slaves, okay? You've also got the Native Americans and any Asians that might have come over, Chinese, Indians, Malaysians, anybody else that would have come over. Okay, these are the laws that they had to live by. So in 1780, many black people lived in America in slavery. They came over from Africa and forced to work for no pay on farms in America. At this time, slaves were seen as less than human and did not have their freedom. So the important thing to understand is that slaves were not seen as human. They were seen as like animals. Okay, that they weren't worth even paying or housing or feeding or clothing them. Okay, they were just treated absolutely appallingly. After 1780, some of the states in America decided to end slavery. Okay, now you can see here there is a real divide between the North and the South, and this is where that Confederate flag comes into play, the one that's been in the news recently. So after 1780, some states in America decided to end slavery. This carried for 101 years until the year 1861. The country had 15 slave states. So those are the pink states on there. Okay, and 19 free states where people were allowed to be free. Okay, so Black people, Asian people, Native Americans, they were allowed to be free. Okay. You can see a very clear divide there. Okay. You've got a real define where you've got those slaves in the South still continuing to, the farmers would have continued to have had slaves, whereas in the North, you would have been paid. You could still work, but you would have been paid and you would have been treated like any other person. Between 1861 and 1865, the blue states on there and the pink states on there on this map here had a civil war. Okay, so the Civil War was a fight between the northern states and the southern states to decide whether slavery should be kept or it should be abolished completely. In 1865, the free states in the north won the Civil War and they decided to abolish it. Okay. A lot of the states, especially in the South, okay, these pink southern states, they were very unhappy about this. So they brought in the Jim Crow laws to keep black and white people separate. They couldn't keep them as slaves, but they thought, you know what, we'll do the next best thing and keep everybody separate. Okay. So what we're going to do now is go back to this. Da-da. So from the 1880s into the 1960s, this ran until the 1960s, okay? So not long at all ago, a majority of American states enforced segregation through Jim Crow, okay? So called after a black character in minstrel shows. So this is where a white person would have, I think the term is blackface, so where they would have put on black makeup and danced around and pretended to have been a black person to take the mickey out of them, to be it in a bad way. So now this would not be allowed at all. Okay, but back then it would have been seen as a form of entertainment. Okay, so you have to understand that white people dressing up as black people to make fun of them, to mock how they talk, to how they dance, how they walk, is completely it's just completely nonsensical. You just shouldn't do it. Okay, it's you just don't do it. But back then it would have been the done thing to do. From Delaware to California and from North Dakota to Texas, many states would impose legal punishments on people for hanging out with members of another race. So if you were a white family and you had friends that were black, you would have been punished for it. Okay, you would have been severely punished for it. Now that seems silly now, doesn't it? Because you mix with all sorts of people and nobody really thinks about who they're mixing with. But if you'd have lived 50, 60 years ago in America, you would not have been allowed to have been friends with people who you might be friends with now. Okay, so just have a little think about who is in your friendship group. Would you have been allowed to have been friends with them? Would have been a very upsetting time to live. Black codes, okay, I've already covered this bit here. Black codes were strict local and state laws that detail when, where, how formerly enslaved people could work and for how much compensation. So people would have been paid, but they would have been paid a lot less than white people doing exactly the same job. Okay. And how they could work, where they could work, there would have been laws on everything. Okay. Laws varied from state to state. If you go on the internet, you can find easily on somewhere like Wikipedia a list of the 50 odd states, okay, and their Jim Crow laws. Some of them, like I think I was reading, California states that a white person may not marry a Chinese person. In other ones, you are not allowed to be schooled in the same building. They are allowed to have the same level of education, but they are not allowed to do so in the same building. if you didn't adhere to these, you could be arrested, fined, put in jail. You could have been hurt. Okay, you would have been hurt. So everybody had to abide by these rules. These laws not only affected the Black community, but also Asians, as I've mentioned. So a large Chinese community, a large Indian community, and a large Malaysian community as well. The Mexicans and Native Americans, although the Native Americans, they repealed the ban on them living coexisting with white people, and that was allowed to be relaxed earlier on because essentially they were Native Americans. They were there first, so they were allowed to mingle with white people earlier. Okay, so this happened in sort of the 1920s, 30s, but Asians, the Black community, and the large Mexican community, would have had those segregations put in place well into the 1960s. So what I want you to do is, I know this task is in your booklet. Now, you may have already completed this task, okay? But what I want you to do is I'm going to go through these laws with you, which are the same ones that you've got in your booklet. And I want you to draw out this diamond 9, okay? So number 1 is going to be the most severe of this list, so which is the most racist. And then I want you to think of the least racist one, the least severe one. And then I want you to fill out, so these will be just underneath number 1. And then you've got your middling ones, and then you've got some that, you know, might not be quite, I mean, they're obviously all going to be bad, but they're just slightly less severe than the ones up here, okay? And you've got some extension work here. So what I'm going to do is go through these. Now, if you haven't done this, please pause the screen now, draw out the diamond 9 with enough space for you to write out these, okay? And then we will go through them, okay? So if you have done it, I can then explain what they all mean, and then you can adjust any answers if you think, actually, no, now Miss has spoken about it, I think this one is worse. Okay, so pause the screen if you need to draw this out, or if you want to do it in your booklet, that's absolutely fine. Right. So, in our list here, let's have a little sip of water. We have got here, no white nurses are to work in a hospital where Black people are being treated. So that means that if you've got a Black person in a hospital that is injured, they cannot be treated by a white nurse. Now, medics take something called the Hippocratic Oath, which means that they do not discriminate who they treat. They treat anyone. Okay? They don't care about your class, your skin colour, who you are. They are there to help. They are there to save lives. So this one, I think, is quite bad. Okay? Because if you're sick and you're ill, you need looking after. It shouldn't matter what you look like at all. In restaurants, it's against the law to serve Black people and white people in the same room. Now, it doesn't mean to say that Black people can't go to the restaurant. That just means they are going to be segregated. Okay? Black and white people should not marry. So that means if they fall in love, they cannot get married. Okay? It will be illegal and they will be sent to prison. Black people are not allowed to take books out of libraries. Now, everyone deserves the right to read. Okay? So although this one isn't punishing people by not treating them when they're sick and could potentially kill them, this is saying that they are not allowed to have the same level of education as white person. Okay, so Black people are not allowed to take books out of libraries. Now, bear in mind, this is the 60s where they didn't have places like Waterstones, they wouldn't have had Kindles, they wouldn't have had Amazon to buy books. So the only place that you could have read was at a library. Okay, so think about how enormous that would have been. libraries were places where people went to read. You weren't able to just buy books, buy magazines. You had your newspapers, but if you wanted to read something specific, or a novel or a reference book, you had to go to a library. If a black and a white person, man and woman, are found living together, they should be imprisoned for 12 months and fined. So they would go to jail for a year and be fined a load of money. Black and white people will have separate waiting rooms for buses and for trains. Why? Why? What is the point in that? That is just extra work for everyone involved. Black and white people shall have separate public drinking fountains. Now, these ones are the ones that we have seen at the start. Okay, those photos that we analysed at the start. There will be separate schools for black and white children. So it says that black children are allowed to have an education, but they're just not allowed to be educated at the same place as white children. Black people must give up their seat on both trains and buses if a white person needs to sit down. Now, whether that black person might be old, pregnant, disabled, doesn't matter. Okay, again, it's ridiculous. Anyone found printing books or leaflets about the rights of black people will be imprisoned and fined. So basically what it is saying is anybody who is trying to make black lives better for black people will be fined and imprisoned. So just trying to make life better for people, you will be sent to prison. Okay, so what I want you to do is put those. I know that there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 of them. You only need 9, so you can leave out 1. Okay, but I want you to put 1 as the most severe. Why do you think, which is the one of these do you think is the most racist, is the most damaging to black people? Which one do you think is the least damaging? I mean, to say that they're not, they all are damaging and they are all awful, but which one is the least severe of those options? Okay, and then pop them in your diamond 9. Okay, so you should have loads of writing in this one, and then writing in this one, writing in this one. Okay, and then what we will do is we will go through and try and answer an exam question on what you have just done. So to finish off, summarise your knowledge from this lesson in the following question. Explain the importance of Jim Crow laws to the lives of black people in America. Now remember, these laws weren't a good thing. So what was the importance of these laws? Well, it meant that they didn't have a life. Yes, they were free, and yes, they were never going to be a slave again. They were never going to be held against their will again, unless they did something wrong in a court of law and were found guilty. But how was their life not great afterwards anyway? So yes, they were never going to be slaves again, but was their life really great being free? No, because they couldn't live like normal people, like anybody else. They had to have these separate laws which stopped them from being completely 100% free. So it was a way of still keeping that power and reminding them that they were never going to be free. And that is what people are now trying to do in the news, is just make people aware that sometimes people are just not as free as what society says that they are, because you have these background laws like this which were allowed to carry on for nearly a century. So please have a go at writing out this question. If you've got any other questions, please ping me an email, and then we can move on to the next part of the booklet next week. Okay, so my email address here is nbishop@stlearnersacademy.org.uk. I think it's the St Leonard's Academy, not St Leonard's Academy. But it's n.bishop. Okay, so please send me some work through, and I will speak to you next week. Bye.